This week on Inside Washington, Juan Miguel Gonzalez arrives here to claim his son. But in Little Havana, Elian's Miami relatives have other ideas. Also, the markets take a wild ride after a judge rules that Microsoft is a predator.
Look at this.
Oh! One remedy, breakup of the company. And Hillary pulls ahead of Rudy in New York. Well, the delicate negotiations to transfer 6-year-old Elian Gonzalez from the care of his Miami relatives to the care of his father continue. This week, the international custody dispute took a dramatic turn when the boy's father came to the United States to make his case. After Castro's send-off in Havana, Juan Miguel Gonzalez flew here to Washington.
Good morning.
Where he declared that he, his second wife, and their son are, in fact, Elian's true family.
It's been an agonizing experience to see my son submitted to cruel psychological pressures aimed at influencing his personality already weakened by the terrible trauma.
So the father's here, Evan. How does this change the equation?
Well, it puts an awful lot of pressure on the family to cough up the kid. I mean, I think it actually is going to happen. It's going to be a messy endgame, I guess, but you can feel the movement here. Elian is going to go home.
Jack, is there a peaceful resolution in sight?
Well, that rests with the family and their supporters in Florida, with the Florida authorities. There's all this talk about they're going there rehearsing, wringing their arms together and linking their arms together and standing around the house and all that kind of thing. The family has got to say, we don't want you to do that, to avoid the kind of confrontation where the marshals have to separate people.
Charles, you've been saying for weeks that the father has to come here and make his decision on free soil. Here he is on free soil.
Well, let's review the bidding. He gets taken to the airport by Fidel Castro. His extended family is taken to a government compound in Havana. He arrives here, he reads a prepared statement. He's greeted by the Cuban government representative, and he's staying at the home of the government representative, meaning he's on Cuban soil. He may actually want to go home and take his kid. We don't know yet. Let him have some time on his own, away from the Cuban goons and agents, and we'll find out.
Nina.
I don't think anybody who saw him at the airport, he was very combative, pretty angry. I mean, I think the time for pretending that he might defect is over. And, they've even waived diplomatic immunity for the house of the diplomat so that he could at least technically leave. But I don't think there's any doubt that if he'd stood right there with his American lawyer right there and said, I want to stay, he would have stayed.
There is a doubt. You may think that a crazed right-winger like me would have it, but I would quote to you a non-crazed liberal colleague of mine, E.J. Dion, who said on one of the shows this morning that he was disturbed by the fact that Miguel, the father, was reading a prepared statement at the airport. This is a guy from a controlled society.
If he wanted amnesty, all he had to do was raise his hand, and he would have had amnesty in a nanosecond.
It is not that
and
easy.
His lawyer, Greg Craig, would have made sure that happened.
I'm not sure.
The guy is reading a prepared statement because he is he's unsophisticated. Right. He's an unsophisticated
so
man.
Is it him speaking?
Suppose Castro did write this. Suppose Fidel wrote the.
Fidel speaking.
Suppose Fidel wrote the statement.
I don't want to hear from Fidel. I want to hear from the father.
But what difference does it make? Is the guy entitled to his son or not?
The statement was probably the statement was written partly by his American lawyer. So I mean, it isn't necessarily Castro's.
It doesn't matter. The fact is, he's entitled to have his son back.
Look, there are not a lot of people in Cuba stupid enough to want to live under communism, but there are some. His father may be one of them, but we don't know yet. And when we know, he'll go home with his father.
The ante keeps getting up. The ante keeps getting up.
Well, it's not like he's going to...
This guy is under the protection of Cubans here, and he shouldn't be. He should be under our protection.
I mean, they don't have to coerce him. He's not going to go back to guard a parking lot anymore. He's going to be a hero of the revolution if he goes back. He's going to get a villa on the beach.
Some hero he's going to be, I'm sure.
Well, let's talk about politics. How do you think Al Gore's handling this, Jack?
Bad to worse. I mean, he now keeps trying to, he takes an untenable, cheap position, and now he's been blundering around trying to explain it. And every time he explains it, he gets in deeper. And it is causing him a lot of problems.
Look,
as Evan forecasts, it's causing him a lot of problems with black Democrats.
I hate
No
to
question.
defend Al Gore, and I'm sure he won't appreciate it, but he did say last year in November in one of the debates that the place to decide this is in family court, not by the INS. So in that sense, he's completely consistent. His timing, of course, is political.
Look, this is
His
Vice
position
President of the
is
United
consistent.
if his position was adopted, the Vice President of the United States would be basically taking the immigration laws of the United States and throwing them out the
No,
window.
that's not true.
It's
Because
an
the INS has
untenable
the-
position for
Janet
somebody
Reno
to
had the
take who's going to
discretion
have
to keep him here
who's
if she
gonna
wanted.
have
She
to def-
decided not to.
It's an untenable
It's
position.
an untenable position for somebody to take who is going to have to defend American citizens who want their children back when they're in foreign countries. And this is not unheard of. This happens fairly frequently.
It is a kind of pandering. It's a kind of pandering that has made people so uneasy about the vice president. Many previous occasions. Now this reinforces the doubts about him.
How does this happen,
It's
Jack?
the
He's
kind
got
of
some smart
pandering-
guys working for him and some smart women working for him. How does this happen?
I don't know,
Craven.
trying to establish the paternity of that policy is very difficult. There's a,
It's the kind of
it's not
pandering,
easy.
it's the kind of pandering that makes me take a shine to him.
Okay, let's take a break. Microsoft muscles out competitors. We'll be right back.
Inside Washington is brought to you by Weyerhaeuser. Weyerhaeuser, the future is growing. And by America's gold producers.
At Weyerhaeuser, we're 100 years old. 60 years ago, we started North America's first tree farm. 30 years ago, we developed high-yield forestry to grow more on the land. This year, like every year, we're planting 40 million seedlings, trees that will be ready for harvesting starting in the year 2030. You see, when you've been growing as long as we have, you like to think ahead 100 years or so. Weyerhaeuser, the future is growing.
The ancients believed gold was a gift from the sun. Today, we use gold in our most vital technologies. A superior electrical conductor, corrosion-resistant gold assures reliability in computers, telephones, and the sensors in life-saving airbags. Lasers rely on gold's light-concentrating power, and gold's reflective property shields satellites as they journey through space. Nothing works like gold. Gold from America.
I was 42 when I discovered my lump.
Finding the lump early helped save my life.
I'm Andrea Rowan, and these are the voices of breast cancer survivors.
Thank God I found my lump when I did.
Conquering breast cancer. That's what Buddy Check 9 is all about.
I'm Christina Gray with 96.3 WHUR. Take charge of your health. Be a part of Buddy Check 9.
Call 202-784-4000 for a free Buddy Check 9 kit.
Pick a buddy
and join the fight against breast cancer.
Charles, you had something more to add on Elion?
I do. I want to offer a suggestion in the name of a piece in comedy here. Let's take the father, his wife, an infant child. Let's take the young boy and the cousin who's become the mother figure for him, and say the granduncle. Let's take those 7 people. Take them away from Miami, away from Washington. Let the U.S. government arrange for them to be alone for a week. It's not beyond the wit of our government to arrange for them to be alone. Let them spend a week together. If after that the father emerges and says, I want to go home with my son, I would agree, and I think it would diffuse the people in Havana who would say, okay, they've had a fair shot, and I think it would lead to a lot of civil peace.
Well, I think that...
What's wrong with a suggestion
They
like
actually
that?
are doing something. I think they're thinking about something like that.
Yeah.
They want to get the family out of that house and the screaming moms
And
have the turnover.
And the
maybe
Miami
even
family wouldn't agree to that.
out of Miami.
But not a turnover, because the Miami family's afraid that once he's out of their house, it's over. It should be on condition that they all go and spend a week together, and then it'll be decided by the father.
The Miami family has no right to take that position legally at all. I mean, this sounds like a good idea, but you can't do this every time some case like this, because I mean, this is rare, but there are cases where we're using the immigration law all the time to send people home. And you cannot let them get away with it because they made a lot of noise. That's what we're talking about.
Does anybody know if things have calmed down, despite what you see on television? If things have calmed down in Miami?
No, it hasn't.
But there's a history in the Cuban community there of more talk than action. I mean, they sometimes are a little noisier than they actually mean to be.
And there hasn't been any violence.
This is too reminiscent. I'm afraid this is, I mean, I think it's a perfectly sensible suggestion, but this is too reminiscent of the school desegregation days where there was a double cross every other minute. And, you know, they're just, at some point you have to say there's an end to it.
Yeah, and you want to send the marshals into that house?
No, you want
I'd rather not. I'd rather have the kid
I think this
brought.
is a very good way to show the Cuban Americans, if the father in the end decides on his own, honestly, that he wants to go home, I think it would assuage a lot of people, and they would say, okay, as I would.
Charles wants to take them all to Four Seasons at Laguna Beach in California for a week.
And then the Florida family will come out and say the kid doesn't want to go.
I would take him to a maximum security prison. After all, it'd be a lot freer than Cuba is.
All right.
And the House is at the moment.
All right. This week, U.S. District Court Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson ruled that Microsoft, the software giant that has been described as the starter engine for our new economy, broke the law in trying to muscle its competitors. Now, the Justice Department cheered, claiming this victory is a win for consumers. But the prospect of a humbled or dismantled Microsoft sent stocks into a nosedive. The markets did rebound, but it threw a scare into some people. House Majority Leader Dick Armey said he'd rather break up the Justice Department than Microsoft. I think he was joking, though. Or was it?
It's not a bad idea. Look, Microsoft clearly is a monopoly. It clearly trampled on the opposition, and it clearly, I think, is guilty of a lot of these charges. However, it's in an industry that moves so quickly that the remedy of a plodding government is going to be years behind the curve. Microsoft is under assault from a lot of places on the net, losing a lot of market position to other quicker, smaller companies. And to go after it in this lumbering way, I think, is simply a mistake.
That's why Gates should have settled. I mean, I don't, you know, because Gates is taking a big risk here that he's going to get a reversal on appeal, which I think is not terribly likely, and he's going to be stuck with a government remedy, which is going to be much more destructive to him than a mutually agreed upon settlement.
And, I mean, here we have a judge who's hardly what you'd call some liberal wacko. He's a Reagan appointee, and a pretty conservative judge. And he's fast-tracked this case to do the maximum that they can to speed it up. I don't pretend to be an expert on this and to know what is the best solution to this, but you know, every time we have a massive monopoly in an economy, going back to Standard Oil, the monopolists say if you break us up, it'll be the end. And AT&T said that. Turned out not to be true.
Well, the AT&T almost was. But I think Charles at the key point that the industry is moving so fast that by the time they get to remedies, the company's going to be fighting an entirely different war anyway.
Netscape was supposed to be the victim of Microsoft. Remember, Mark paid $10 billion for Netscape.
Well, that's what makes it so silly, because the charge and the accusation is about the browser wars, which are over. They were over years ago. There are new fights now on the net, and Microsoft is scrambling against these smaller companies, so it's really quite irrelevant. What's really interesting is how the rest of the high-tech economy took a dive on the market this week. You would have expected that its competitors would have done well on the market in response. But I think what's happening is there's a fear that the government, which up until now has let the high-tech industry alone, unregulated, is going to start stepping in everywhere.
Baloney.
And I think that's what sent the market crashing.
What sent the market crashing is the well-known fact that most of these companies are not making any money, and they keep going up and up and up and up and up and up.
It's making a fortune. It crashed. All these other companies who are competitors who testified against Microsoft all went down dramatically on Monday. It's because people are afraid of government regulation.
Because the stocks are overvalued.
Yeah.
I mean, the market is like tulip futures.
That's a tautology to say it's overvalued.
Well, let's go back to Gates and fighting this business. Suppose his strategy is just to drag it out until we have a new administration. If it's a Republican administration, it's unlikely that a Joel Klein is going to surface.
But his problem is not just with the Justice Department. It's also with all these state attorneys general.
And private actors, too.
He's now invited, because this judgment will stand in the books, he's now invited himself to be sued by everybody under the sun. And this great leader entrepreneur is going to spend the rest of his life in court if he's not careful. This great dynamo is going to be entangled in all sorts of legal snares that are going to be corrosive and destructive.
And you can't even be sure that the Justice Department would dramatically change course no matter what Dick Armey wants. I mean, Robert Bork was one of the principal people on the side of the government, filing a brief on the side of the government, for example. So I don't think you can be confident that the government would change course in a Bush administration.
Another question. Trent Lott, the Senate Majority Leader, says this makes him nervous, that Justice Department lawyers are getting into the policy arena, and that's where Congress should be acting or not acting.
Well, I mean,
saying it doesn't make it so.
Yeah, there are laws on the books under which the Justice Department is acting. They're not making this up as they go along. This is not a question of strict constructionism being overrun here.
Bob Torricelli, Democrat, says it is not in our national interest to break up Microsoft.
These are all people who are getting a lot of campaign money from Microsoft. I don't, you know, Joe Klein is not some sort of a nutcake. He's a fairly conservative Democrat. And it seems to me that they've gone the extra mile trying to settle.
The only thing worse than a court-imposed solution would be a congressionally imposed solution.
That's about right.
Be even more
We've
twisted.
got a history here of the IBM antitrust case, which went on for decades and decades, dragged it down. In the end, the government gave up because it was all obsolete by the time it ended. And I think it's happening again. In regulating a high-tech industry, which are moving rapidly, I think this is a very stupid kind of remedy, and it's going to hurt the entire industry.
This case has been quite different,
this
though, than IBM.
Industry has been the engine of the boom of the last decade, and we're going to kill the golden goose.
You're in love with an idea, and I don't think you can afford to be in love with an idea at the cost of what makes capitalism work, which is competition.
What are Gates' chances on appeal?
I'm really not sure. I don't think they're great, but you know, who knows?
It depends which 3 judges he draws on.
Well,
on the DC
it could even be expedited directly to the Supreme Court. That's entirely possible.
Okay. Thank you very much. When we come back, Hillary's up in the polls, Rudy's down, and what's this about the President of the United States and Leonardo DiCaprio?
We know local news is important to you. That's why at 9 Eyewitness News, we're committed to bringing you the most news from where you live.
That's why we make local weather a top priority.
It's why we look deeper into local issues.
That's why at 9 Eyewitness News, we're committed to bringing you the most news from where you live.
For everyone who lives here.
After all, no matter how the world affects you, it still affects you right here. 9 Eyewitness News, where local news comes first.
Whoa, oh, mercy, mercy me.
Have you given up on our children? Please don't. Do you think our children's situations are hopeless? Please don't. You know, many people in America are looking for answers to our youth problems. My name is Tyrone Parker, and I'm president of the Alliance of Concerned Men. The Alliance of Concerned Men have found the answers in the solutions. We have proven to be very successful over the last 9 years.
That the Alliance programs work so well because I get to spend time with people one-on-one and learn about their life.
Solutions to juvenile crime and violence do exist. In order for us to continue it, we need your support. Thank you so much. You touched my life one day.
I can't capture in words what it means to have played here and to come around and come back and follow sports here. That's my whole mission, to connect with the viewers and be able to show them things they're not going to get to see anyplace else. I'm all about what happens off the field. What are we going to do today that hasn't been done? How are we going to do this differently?
A new CBS News New York Times poll shows that Hillary Clinton is pulling ahead of Rudy Giuliani in New York in the Senate race. She's even tying him upstate, where the Republican generally does better, and she beats him 3-1 in New York City in this latest poll. Incidentally, John McCain has made a commercial with Giuliani. The ad is entitled Integrity, and it talks about the mayor's honesty, humanity, and his tolerance. Jack, also the poll says that he hurt himself by making the comments about the unarmed black man who was shot to death by the police recently.
It is. I think taking a poll seriously at this stage is a great mistake. If it's 8 points, it's 8 points, but it's not. It is on sand. The fact is, it reflects that case almost totally, and you can see why. People upstate Republicans upstate are wary about a New York City mayor without regard to party anyway. And for him to behave the way he has, Giuliani to behave the way he has, is unsettling. On the other hand, he's got a lot of pizzazz, and he's able, you know, you can convince people of anything nowadays.
Listen,
yeah, how about the McCain factor? Does that help him?
I think McCain is the one person who can help somebody a little bit. At least he seems, you know.
We've always known that the only person who could beat Giuliani was Giuliani. And we're 7 months before an election. And, you know, they always say polls are a snapshot. In New York, I mean, if you take the polls 7 months before the election did not have Chuck Schumer being elected to the Senate. So, I mean, this is just foolhardy. It's just we're entertaining ourselves to.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Well, nothing.
if it were only entertaining. Look, it's a blip, and it's obviously a reaction to the mayor's idiotic response to the shooting of this innocent man, where he drags out his juvenile record while the body's still cold. I mean, that's sort of incomprehensible.
Still warm.
Actually, yeah, still warm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I forgot
You're welcome.
all my medical stuff here. So it's clearly a mistake he made. It cost him about a dozen points. He'll get it back.
Evan.
Well, you know, it's interesting. We were saying, or I was saying at least, that Hillary didn't have a chance not so long ago. That's clearly changed, and she must be feeling pretty good about this.
All right. Let me ask you about the director of the FBI, Louis Freeh. The Washington Post reported this week that Freeh's job hunting. His term runs till year 2003, but we're told that he wants to leave the government by the end of this year. He has children preparing for college. FBI director in this day and age doesn't make an awful lot of money in terms of sending kids to school, and he's looking for a higher salary. What do we think of that, Charles?
He likes to be called Louis, by the way. He didn't like to be called Louis.
Louis,
well,
yeah, that's right.
look,
Sorry.
he's doing what everybody else does here. You come here to do good, and then you end up
doing well.
Doing well. You work for a few years, many years, at a reasonably low salary compared to your colleagues in law school, and then when you get out, you want to cash in. So I'm not surprised. I don't think he's any better or worse than the hundreds of others who preceded him.
That's all true on the surface. I mean, in some ways, if you just see this as it is, this guy's played his dues, now he's going to cash in. But there's a deeper story about Louis Freeh, which is puzzling. On paper, and to meet him, Louis Freeh should be the greatest director that the FBI has ever seen. He has everything going for him. He was a brick agent. He was a federal judge. He's a charismatic figure. He's truly a man of integrity. I mean, truly is. Yeah. Yet somehow the FBI hasn't done all that great on his watch. And whether that's because of his own sort of rather holy demeanor clashing with a culture that didn't really want that, it's really hard to sort out. I've been involved in a couple of stories where we tried to sort it out, but it's just there's a sadness about Louis Freeh that he hasn't lived up to expectations.
He went his own way vis-a-vis the administration of the Justice Department in ways that I thought were beyond the bounds. I think he should have been fired. But if he wants to go down and make a lot of money, fine. It's America.
I want to change the subject here. ABC was going to team up Leonardo DiCaprio with the President of the United States, and they were going to talk about the environment. But now the president of ABC News, David Weston, says, we did not send him to interview the president. No one is that stupid. What is going on with this, Evan?
I don't see why get all entangled in this? I mean, Weston's in the showbiz business. Why doesn't he just say, hey, we got an interview with the president?
Well, at least the president of ABC News as opposed to ABC Entertainment.
Because the reason is because he got out front saying, you know, that this wasn't an interview. Somehow he got entrapped into
Sam Donaldson blew up.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
And
he went through the roof.
He wanted to say, oh, this isn't really an interview. This is just a walkthrough. And then what's happened to Weston in this circumstance is what happens to political leaders. You know, he's made a stupid little mistake, and it keeps getting compounded. And by the time we're done, we're saying this raises serious questions about the credibility of ABC.
We never take our own advice.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. When we get in the same pickles that politicians do, we always castigate them for not admitting their errors and fessing up. It just proves that we're as stupid human beings as the politicians.
Let me get this straight. This story is a story that news and entertainment are blurring together. That's a dog bites man story.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the fact is the network news people are sensitive about it, and they should be.
Well, are we being too stiff-necked about this?
Yeah, probably, but there have to be standards somewhere.
You have to draw the line somewhere.
So I say big deal.
Big deal. When we come back, a word on sexual harassment among the top brass at the Pentagon.
In places like this, thousands of Americans work producing gold. Gold assures reliability in computer electronics, telephones, and TVs. Gold even protects satellites. And guided by state and federal laws, today's gold mining companies reclaim the land they mine, replanting, making a home for wildlife, protecting water and air. In places like this, nothing works like gold. Gold, mined in America.
The nation's capital is a unique place for local news. To some, local is Virginia, Maryland, or D.C. To some, local news is the issues people here care about. Or it means having your eyes on the world, but your roots right here. At 9 Eyewitness News, we think local news is all of that. That's why we're committed to bringing you the most coverage from where you live. 9 Eyewitness News, where local news comes first.
Television sets equipped with the new V-chip are now available. This system allows you to program your television to control the programs your children watch. Use the TV parental guidelines to choose programming best suited for your family. The V-chip and TV parental guidelines. Together, your guide to better family viewing. For a free booklet, call toll-free 1-877-2-VCHIP-TV or visit our website at tvguidelines.org.
At 9 Eyewitness Weather, we know that the weather in Frederick may not be the same as what's happening in Fredericksburg. That's why we're the only station to give you zone weather coverage. With our zone forecast, we can show what's happening in 6 different areas, from Chambersburg to Colonial Beach. Pinpoint forecast, so you know what conditions will be like in your neighborhood.
Zone weather from Channel 9's First Warning Weather Team.
It's clearer and closer.
And it's only on 9 Eyewitness News, where local news comes first.
Sex in the military. We have a first this week. One Army general charging another Army general with sexual harassment. What do we know about this, Nina?
Well, there's a lot we don't know. We know that General Kennedy, the woman general, 3-star general, had an encounter with General Smith,
General Larry Smith, Major
General Larry Smith, and then he made some sort of an inappropriate advance to her, allegedly.
4 years ago.
She reported it informally and was assured that he wouldn't be properly promoted or whatever. She left it alone until he was promoted to Deputy Inspector General, which means that he would be overseeing exactly this kind of a complaint, at which point she reported it formally. And somehow it got out. Now, we don't know what the nature of this was, but it seems to me that if you really want somebody to not get that kind of a job, you have to report them. You have to formally report them.
What this thing shows you is there is a bias in favor of the men in the situation in the military. We already know that.
Evan?
It shows you that it goes on, the pervasiveness of it.
It happens everywhere.
It happens everywhere, every time.
Charles.
Endless story, a recurring story. We're going to hear it in one variation or another over and over again with men and women in the military. No way out.
That's the last word. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.